Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing my capstone essay titled Abject Art and the Physicalization of Struggle. And the thesis for this essay argues that abject art is one of, if not the most effective art forms for expressing invisible systems of oppression and obstacles that contribute to normalized struggle. The artists use the confrontational nature of abject art to touch on the innate visceral senses of their audience and allow them to access the more complex themes of the visual stimuli. So the first example that I bring in my paper is Knut Asdam's Untitled Pissing. And this is a 50 to 70-second video looped for 30 minutes. And a lot of the time it's presented in a one-to-one ratio to the audience so that they really connect with the subject. And the video is presented in a very confrontational, architectural, as Asdam puts it, focus on the phallus, representing a very traditional patriarchal view of masculinity. As the subject begins to pee his pants, the childlike expression of fear and loss of control sharply contrasts this view of masculinity. And Asdam calls the audience through their disgust to address not only their ideas of masculinity, but how this expression of the body strips that masculinity from the subject. And then I go on to talk about Body Tracks by Mendieta, which in its performance is incredibly ritualistic and unfeeling in its creation of these violent body tracks. And it represents the normalization of violence, but taking the piece out of the context of the performance confronts the audience with this representation of violence that is not usually shown to wide audiences, and it demands that they confront the multitude of possible violent scenarios that led to these tracks. Next, I talk about Ron Athey's 4 Scenes in a Harsh Life, which is a performance in 1994 during the AIDS crisis. And as Athey was a gay man with HIV, the public was immediately sensing danger from this performance, because they see blood and they see a gay man, and it really brings up that villainizing of queer people that was happening during the AIDS crisis. And in the context of the performance, the piercing and bloodletting art form, along with the queer campy costumes and the religious themes, allows Athey to reclaim a sense of his queer identity in the face of this religious environment and the trauma that it brings out in many queer people. And the bleeding and the bloodletting art form symbolizes the pain of existing in this space as a queer person. And all of these elements work together to symbolize the state of being queer at the time, and Athey uses this discomfort with the intentional bleeding of the participants to express a more internalized pain. And lastly, one of the most prolific series of performance art, Marina Abramovic's Rhythm series. And we begin with Rhythm 10 on the very left, as she has more than a dozen knives in front of her. And as she picks one up and begins to stab herself, once she stabs herself, she puts it back down, grabs another knife, and does it all over again. And this symbolizes a control over pain and discomfort, and yet an isolation in that experience. Whereas Rhythm 0 is the complete opposite. She has complete agency in her experience of pain, as she allows her audience to pick from this table of 60 to 70 objects displayed. And, they start out soft with the feathers and food and clothing, and then get to cutting off her clothes using the scalpel to cut her skin, and holding a gun up to her head, seeing if she'll pull the trigger. And this really symbolizes a complete apathy towards the pain in oneself and putting others over the comfort of the self. So she does an amazing job of representing on the very left this complete control over pain and experience, and on the right, the complete apathy towards oneself and putting the idea of the comfort of others over oneself. And though these are both very physical representations of this, they also represent a more internal struggle as well. Rhythm 5 represents a good balance where she has agency in putting herself in the middle of this burning star, but allows herself to trust her audience to experience her pain and know when she's had enough. And in the end, her audience pulls her out as she starts to pass out from smoke inhalation. And it represents a balance between trust in the people around and control of one's agency and their comfort. And so together, these art pieces represent invisible structures of society like masculinity in Asdam's piece, violence in Mendieta's piece, queerness in Athey's piece, and balance of apathy and control in Abramovic's piece through unconventional artistic methods. The performance and the discomfort that objection produces in the audience gives them an outlet to understand complex themes through the accessible nature of the senses. Through their disgust, the audience is able to better understand the ways that systems of oppression and social norms affect people in unique ways. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If you would like to see other examples of what I've worked on in my college experience, you can go to the website at the bottom of this list.